Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Ruka's plan was to spend a few years in the translation department, as it would help her to get into the public relations department. This way, she would be able to work with her parents and even take care of them in the future. Unaware she was completely dazed, she came back to her senses to find that the group of people was already close to her. Panicked, as she couldn't continue being sneaky behind the pillar, she walked out from behind the pillar and stood at the side with her head lowered, waiting for the group to pass. Ren had his eyes on Ruka the moment she appeared from behind the pillar. His eyes lingered on her and, as though her appearance had drowned out the voices of his guests, he smiled delightedly. Just then, she coincidentally raised her head to find he was smiling at her. The two made eye contact with one another among the crowd. One pair of eyes was captivating and had a deep gaze, while the other was filled with flustered nervousness. Yet, the two hadn't the slightest intent to look away from one another. This spark the two had for each other was caught on by Victoria, who had clenched her fists in jealousy. So, their relationship has already become an uncontrollable one. In the end, Ruka was the first to lower her head, as she didn't dare to continue being frivolous with him, especially at such a time. The consequences should they were found to be doing so would be dire after all. Just like that, Ren passed Ruka by. Nonetheless, his gaze seemed to shake her heart to its very core, as though the man had filled her heart to the brim. She had never felt like this before. Even when she had a crush on other boys in the past, it wasn't as strong as what she was feeling right now. What she felt right now was so strong that it touched the depths of her heart, so much so that she could feel the tremor of her heart echoing in her ears. Just as Ruka wanted to peek at the man, she felt a sharp glare at her. The moment she turned her head in the direction of the glare, she found Victoria coming toward her. Victoria dragged her by the hand to one of the empty corners. Gritting her teeth, she said, "Ruka, I'm warning you. Stay away from him. You'll ruin him." Ruka held her breath while listening to Victoria, as the latter's gaze indicated to her that she wanted to kill her at this moment. He was born into a high position. Do you think he would renounce it in favor of a girl like you? If you dare seduce him again, I wouldn't mind dragging both of you through the mud. Victoria's voice was tinged with intimidation. I will announce to the world about your relationship. By then, he will be subjected to the public's malice. After all, who would protect a man who would even go after his sister's goddaughter? Not only will his morality and character be questioned, but it'll also be impossible for the two of you to be together. Desperate and helpless upon her words, Ruka stared at Victoria with tears in her eyes. Her words were just like a knife that had stabbed right at her heart, and she felt it could end her life at any moment now. You better remember my words. After Victoria gave her warning, she left Ruka and went back to Ren's group. Left in the corner, Ruka found herself panting heavily, her breathing turning ragged, as though she just had a near-death experience. Momentarily losing the strength in her knees, she held onto the wall for support. She thought back on how cold and harsh Victoria's words were, as though they were meant to rob her life with every word she said. Making him the subject of the public's criticism? For him to be despised and spurned by the public? No. I'll never let him be humiliated like that. She thought with one hand over her heart. As she closed her eyes from the aches in her heart, tears started running down her cheeks. Ruka leaned against the wall for some time when one of the cleaning ladies came over and asked in concern, "Are you all right? Are you not feeling well?" "I'm fine. Thank you." With her hand on the wall, she stood up and bowed as thanks before heading in the office's direction with her head hung. She couldn't help but stumble on the way back, so she decided to head into the restroom to refresh herself. As she washed her face, she noticed droplets of water running down her cheeks. Though she was unsure if it was the water from the tap or tears from within, she pursed her lips and desperately suppressed her urge to cry. Just then, someone came out from the cubicle, which prompted her to lean forward and continue splashing her face with water. Meanwhile, in one of the lounges of the translation department, after the guests were served tea, Run came out with his phone and said to Elijah, "Bring me to her office." After Elijah asked one of the nearby employees, the said employee showed them to Ren's desired destination, to which the latter followed as he took a step forward. It was at this time that Ruka just came back from the restroom. Upon opening the door to the internship office, she found Caspian reading a book inside. The moment the latter saw how pale she looked, he stood up in a hurry and said, "Ruka, are you okay?" Slightly dumbfounded, she casually took a seat by the door before she shook her head. "I'm fine. You don't look so good." Caspian brought her mug and gave it to her. "Here, drink some water." As Ruka took a sip of water, Caspian's eyes lit up with hints of shyness. He then went back to his desk and took out a beautifully wrapped box from the drawer before walking back to her. "Ruka, this is for you." Surprised by the gift, she immediately stood up. "Caspian, what are you?" "It's your birthday present." "I'm not sure if it'll be to your liking," Caspian explained while bashfully touching his head. "Open it. See if you like it." Upon Caspian's words, Ruka was both confused and grateful. However, as she had forgotten to close the office door, there was a tall attractive figure standing just outside. The man did not enter the office, but merely stood outside and watched Caspian shyly handing Ruka a gift. "It's just a small token of appreciation, so just accept it." Caspian was determined in handing his gift to Ruka. Oblivious to the eyes of the figure outside the office, Caspian and Ruka locked eyes with one another. Although Ruka hesitated slightly, she accepted the gift in the end. "Thank you. I'm sure I'll like it, whatever it may be." Caspian instantly became happy like a child. "Can I give you a hug?" Stunned by the request, Ruka was unable to react, as Caspian had already put his arms around her. After a brief moment where she rested her head on the man's shoulder, he let her go and started his confession in a panicked tone. "Ruka, I like you. I've liked you ever since I first met you." Ruka was thoroughly dumbfounded by the man's confession, as Caspian's confession came out of left field for her. She had accepted his gift thinking that it was because of their friendship. Nevertheless, it was at this time that a shriek came from outside the door. Startled by the shrieks of what seemed to belong to women coming through the door, both Ruka and Caspian turned toward the door and saw Rin standing outside through the glass. Immediately, Ruka widened her eyes in surprise. How long has he been standing by the door? Although there was a door between them, Ruka could feel Ren's fervent gaze on her, as though he was displaying his irritation at her. Caspian was startled as well since he hadn't expected the vice president to be standing by the door. Just as he excitedly looked at him, he was met with an authoritative gaze, one that gave him chills, as Ren looked at him with a cold expression. After a brief second, Ron left. Following his departure, Inara and Michelle cried out in excitement. "Oh my God! We got to see him up close. If we knew that he would be here, why did we even bother to go outside? So handsome. Who can resist such an attractive man?" It was when the gift in Ruka's hand had somehow slipped from her hand did she come back to her senses. Startled, she immediately picked it up from the floor and returned to her seat, all the while in a panic. Does that mean he saw Caspian confessing to me? Fraught with anxiety, she had the urge to run after Rin to explain the situation, but couldn't move a muscle as Victoria's threat came to mind. Conflicted, she was at a loss for what to do. It was then that her phone rang. She choked a little when she saw that the caller ID belonged to that man who just left. "Hello," she whispered after she accepted the call. "Come to the third conference room, said the man in an authoritative tone with his low and magnetic voice before he ended the call. After the call ended, Ruka let out a sigh. He probably wants an explanation from me. Then, she stood up and was about to walk out of the room when Michelle asked, Ruka, where are you going? The restroom? No, I'm going out to make a phone call, Ruka replied with hints of nervousness in her tone before she left post-haste. Upon entering the conference room, she found Elijah standing there with 4 other bodyguards standing in line. Elijah then gave her an implicit look that indicated her to go inside the room, to which she nodded and knocked on the 3rd conference room door before entering the room. There, Ren was sitting with a strange expression on his face. His handsome face was slightly harder to look at than usual. Afraid of thinking that the man's expression was because of her, she greeted him as usual. Mr. Ren, do you need something from me? Her eyes, however, were looking down at the ground due to her guilty conscience. With his slender legs crossed, there was a coldness to the man, one that was rarely seen. Although there wasn't any trace of anger in Ren's expression, that indifferent demeanor of his was enough to cause others to hold their breath in front of him. Ruka was doing so at the moment. With her eyes, as big as a puppy was when it did something wrong, tinged with panic, she held her breath as she waited for the man to speak. Explain to me just what happened there. Ren raised his head and gazed deeply at Ruka. His frown indicated he was upset. Being gazed at the man this way, Ruka couldn't help but feel aggrieved at how serious Ren's expression was in questioning her. It's not like I've made a huge mistake. Nevertheless, she reluctantly explained, he's Caspian Gibbons, a colleague of mine. He prepared a birthday gift for me, and I hugged him as thanks. That's all. Did you reject him? Ron continued his questioning. Ruka blinked at Ren's question. Is he talking about Caspian's confession? It was then that Victoria's words came back to her mind once more. I will announce to the world about your relationship. By then, he will be subjected to the public's malice. With Victoria's words in mind, she pursed her lips briefly before she took a deep breath and said, I think I like him, so I'm considering accepting his confession. Mr. Ren, I'm sorry, but I can't reciprocate your feelings. Our age gap is just too big. Plus, I prefer someone around my age. When she finished speaking her mind, she hung her head low, as she hadn't the courage to face the man. Then, without a moment's delay, she ran out of the room. The man, who was left behind, had his lips tightly pressed together in a small frown. His Adam's apple constantly moved up and down as he tried to suppress the surge of emotions coming from within. As Ruka left the room, she bumped into Elijah, even though the latter had tried to avoid her. Miss Singed. However, she couldn't greet him back, as tears welled in her eyes. She was afraid of others seeing through her sadness, so she wanted to find a place to be alone for a while. Hence, she went to the restroom and hid in one of the compartments. Whenever she lifted her head, her small face was full of tears as an inexplicable sadness continued to wash over her. By the door, Elijah kept glancing at his watch, as they had plans to accompany the guests to their next destination. However, the man he was waiting for inside hadn't left the room. Afraid that he would disturb the man, he couldn't enter the room and could only stew in anxiety. If I'm not mistaken, Miss Singed looked sad with her eyes red when she left the room. Did Sir quarrel with her? Finally, the door of the conference room opened and Ren stepped out with his usual indifferent expression. Let's go, he said to Elijah. Sir, are you all right? Elijah was worried, and he couldn't help but continue. Miss Singed didn't. With a slight frown, Ren stopped in his tracks and turned his head to Elijah. What about her? She didn't look too good, replied Elijah. After a faint sigh, Ron said, Where's Victoria's office? Bring me there. Elijah nodded as a response and led Ren toward a hallway. Meanwhile, Victoria had just returned to her office. She was originally happy when she knew Ren was still around. However, she never thought that he would ignore her the entire time he was around. This made her heart grow cold, which was why she had ruthlessly said those things to Ruka. She really hated it. Just then, Victoria's assistant entered in a hurry and said, "Mr. Hassan is coming here. Miss Parfait, hurry and fix your makeup." Immediately on her feet, Victoria excitedly asked, "Really? Is he really coming this way?" "Yes. I think he's here to see you." Since this assistant of Victoria's had been with her for many years, she naturally knew that Run was someone she fancied. Victoria then opened her drawer and took out the makeup kit that she had just put away. After carefully checking her makeup and doing some brief touch-ups, she heard footsteps coming from outside her office. Suppressing the intense excitement on her face, she put on a natural, charming smile. Why is he coming here so suddenly? Does he have something to say to me? No matter the reason, she wanted to present the best of herself to him. Then, the door opened. The moment Rin entered the office, the door was shut behind him. With her breathing turning slightly irregular and her heart beating faster, Victoria pointed at the couch and said, "Ran. Come, have a seat." "I'll be leaving after a few words," Ron said indifferently. Victoria's heart ached briefly as she realized that the man was here for another purpose, and not as a friend like she originally thought. "Go ahead." She took a deep breath as she waited for Rin to speak. "Did you say something to Ruka recently?" Ron asked with his somber gaze on Victoria, his tone slightly interrogative. Victoria already had a hunch about what Rin was going to say. Once she confirmed her hunch was true, her excitement instantly turned into bitterness and sorrow. "Ron, just how inferior to Ruka do you think I am?" Her eyes welled with tears of resentment and jealousy. She wanted to know from the man himself why she had lost to Ruka. "I'm warning you once more, outsiders have no right to meddle in the affairs between me and Ruka. If you fill her mind with nonsense behind my back, then you better be ready for the consequences." Rin warned Victoria as he glared at her, as though he knew what she had done. As the color drained from her face, Victoria became as pale as a sheet. In the end, she only let out a pained choke as she held onto her desk. With a sorrowful gaze, she watched the man about to take his leave. Reluctant to give up, she cried out to him. "Ron, Ruka is your sister's goddaughter. Just look at the age gap between the two of you. If people find out about your relationship with her, your reputation will be negatively affected. I'm only doing all this for your own good." Stopping in his tracks, Ron shot a sharp glare at Victoria and said coldly, "Just what exactly have you said to Ruka?" "I told her to leave you alone. I told her not to ruin you. I said all that because I love you." Victoria's emotions grew intense. "You haven't the slightest idea just how much I love you. Yet, you couldn't even be bothered to look at me. Rin Hassan, why do you think I would bother telling Ruka off like that? I just don't want to see your shine fade to gray." Frowning, Run kept his gaze tinged with chills on Victoria. "Victoria, since we've known each other for so long, I'm only telling you this once, don't interfere with my affairs." Then, he left the room. After the assistant watched Ren and his men leave, she suddenly heard crying sounds coming from the office. Startled, she opened the door to find Victoria slumped on the floor, crying with a pained expression. "Miss Parfait, what happened?" She was completely taken aback, as she thought Victoria had a chance to get together with Ren. However, looking at the situation, she knew there was no longer any possibility for them to get together. When Ruka returned to her office with her eyes slightly swollen, she heard Michelle say from outside the office, "Mr. Hassan's car is leaving with the guests. And here I wanted to take a few more glances at him." Slightly stunned by what she heard, Ruka thought, did he leave? With how busy he is with his schedule, do you think he'll be free to just stand around for you to steal glances at? Inara rolled her eyes. You think he's some celebrity that you can get an autograph from? Where do you think I can get a copy of his autograph? Michelle actually did have such thoughts in mind. In your dreams. Do you really think you'll be able to get Mr. Hassan to give you his autograph? Then, Inara complained, is the powder you're using expired? Just look at how oily my face is. Ruka, how are you so calm? Aren't you excited that Mr. Hassan has graced us with his presence? Michelle couldn't be bothered with Inara, so she turned her attention toward Ruka. With her eyes lowered, Ruka replied, I'm not. Didn't he just pass by the office just now? That's right. But, why was he here just now? Strange. Michelle had a puzzled expression. Soon, evening came and it was almost time for the employees to knock off. Ruka started to feel anxious. She thought she needed to find a different place to stay, as she couldn't intrude on Ren's place any longer. Thus, she called Rita and told her that she might stay the night at her place, to which the latter was very welcoming. When it was time for Ruka to leave, she decided to spend the night at Rita's place before finding a suitable time to pack her things from Ren's house. Just as Ruka left the lobby with her bag in tow, a tall bodyguard by the side called out to her. Miss Singed, I am under Mr. Hassan's instructions to bring you home. Startled, Ruka asked, bring me home? Yes. After a brief moment of thought, Ruka waved her hand and said, thank you, but I'll be staying at my friend's place tonight. Miss Singed, please inform Mr. Hassan personally. I'm just following orders here, the bodyguard replied in a serious tone. Ruka knew that she shouldn't make things difficult for the bodyguard, but she didn't want to call Ren as well. Suddenly, she remembered she had previously gotten Elijah's number, so she decided to have him be the messenger instead. Taking out her phone, she then dialed Elijah's number. Hello, Miss Singed. The call got through rather quickly. Elijah, please tell Mr. Hassan that I won't be going home tonight, Ruka said politely. Miss Singed, I also have some news for you. What is it? Ruka was slightly surprised. Sir has been admitted to the hospital. Huh? He did? Ruka widened her eyes in shock and asked hurriedly, did something happen to him? His condition worsened, so he needed to be hospitalized. Elijah answered before he continued, if you come and visit him, or maybe even take care of him for a while, I'm sure Sir would be very happy. He's in a bad mood now. I'm afraid it'll only worsen his mood if I do. Like a child who had just done something wrong, she bit her lips and was afraid of going home. Why would you think so? If Sir were to see you, he would immediately become better even if he didn't take his medicine. Is the bodyguard with you now? Tell him to send you over here. Saying that, Elijah ended the call. With her phone in hand, Ruka was stunned briefly before she raised her head and said to the bodyguard, please bring me to the hospital. With a nod from the bodyguard, he then gestured for Ruka to follow him to his car. On the way to the hospital, Ruka was filled with worries. Why did his condition worsen? He still looked fine back in the conference room just now. Just like that, she stewed in her worries all the way to the hospital. With guards posted in every corner of the place, the hospital Rin was admitted to was anything but ordinary, so much so that even she had to register several times just to enter the hospital. Elijah came and escorted her to a ward on the 6th floor. There, he knocked on the door before he said to her, Sir is inside here. Miss Singed, please. Ruka nodded and was about to turn the door handle when Elijah continued in a whisper, Miss Singed, Sir is in a bad mood now. Please try not to agitate him. Also, he hasn't had much to eat today, so please persuade him to eat something. Listening to the assistant's instructions, she was briefly stunned before she nodded as a response. Then, she gently opened the door and entered the ward. Although this was a hospital, the ward Ruka entered was a private VIP suite. On top of that huge white bed, Ren was sitting with a document in hand while hooked up to the 4-drip. When he noticed that she was the one who had entered the ward, he continued to read his document after taking a glance at the woman. "Mr. Wren, are you okay?" she asked in concern while walking over to his side, her eyes examining the color of the man's face. "I'm fine," he answered indifferently. "Do you still have a fever?" Ruka continued asking while subconsciously reaching her hand out to his forehead to measure Wren's temperature, to which he said nothing and allowed it to happen. She discreetly heaved a sigh of relief after confirming that he was at a relatively normal temperature. Noticing the fruits by the bedside, she asked, "Do you want an apple? I'll peel them for you." "I don't feel like it." Wren refused. "Then, what do you feel like eating?" Ruka asked as she blinked and thought back on Elijah saying that he hadn't eaten anything today.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.